The night I found out. Mark never thought he'd be one of those men, one of the ones who scrolled through a friend's social media feed, only to be stopped cold by a photo that would change everything. That night had been like any other. A late shift at work, followed by a quick dinner he had to eat alone because his wife, Claire, had told him she was out with friends. She'd been going out more often lately, but he hadn't paid it much mind. Life had become routine, that is, until tonight. It was his best friend Dave who sent him the first message. A casual, "Hey, isn't this Claire?" with a picture attached. At first glance, it was just a photo of a dimly lit bar, a crowd, and someone who indeed looked like his wife. But it was the second image that had his heart stopping in his chest. Claire was seated at the bar, not with her girlfriends as she'd said, but with a man. And not just any man, but a guy Mark had never seen before. They were laughing, Claire's hand resting on the man's arm with an intimacy that should have belonged to Mark. As Dave sent more photos, the pieces of the night began to form an undeniable picture. The man's arm was around Claire's waist in one. In another, their faces were inches apart, as if they were whispering secrets. Mark's stomach turned. A million questions ran through his mind. Why is she lying? Who is this guy? But none of them mattered. Not in that moment. What mattered was the storm brewing inside of him, a surge of betrayal and disbelief. Without hesitation, Mark grabbed his keys. He couldn't sit there and stew in his emotions. He had to confront this. The bar wasn't far, and the drive felt like a blur. Every second closer to that place, his anger grew, gnawing at him from within. By the time he reached the parking lot, Mark could feel his pulse hammering in his ears. The bar was packed, loud music thumping from inside, and a crowd of people mingling at the entrance. Mark weaved through the bodies, scanning for Claire. There she was, just like in the photos, seated at a high-top table near the bar, the man still beside her. They looked comfortable, as if they had done this 100 times before. Claire's laughter rang out, oblivious to the fact that her husband was just feet away. Mark's blood boiled, but instead of rushing in like a bull, he stopped for a second. He needed to think clearly. This was about more than his pride. He wanted to know the truth, the whole truth. So, he approached cautiously, his heart racing but his mind focused. He positioned himself behind a pillar, watching as the two leaned in closer, their words drowned out by the noise. It was then that he noticed Claire's phone, lying face up on the table, lighting up repeatedly. He glanced at the screen and saw messages from a number saved as Mark. His name. His messages. She wasn't responding. In fact, she hadn't even looked at her phone in over an hour. Feeling the last thread of his patience snap, Mark stepped out from behind the pillar and walked toward their table. Claire was mid-laugh when she caught sight of him, her expression shifting from surprise to shock, then quickly to guilt. She froze. "Mark," she stammered, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. The man beside her shifted awkwardly, looking between Claire and Mark, clearly confused but sensing the tension. "Who's this, Claire?" Mark's voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. He had prepared for this moment, imagining 100 different confrontations during the drive, but now that it was happening, it was much messier than he'd anticipated. Claire stood, her hands fumbling as she tried to explain. "Mark, it's not what it looks like." "Then tell me, Claire, what is it if not what it looks like?" Mark's voice grew louder, his emotions bubbling to the surface. He looked at the man. "Who the hell are you?" The man, clearly caught off guard, stood up and held up his hands. "Look, man, I didn't know she was married. She said she was single." The words hit Mark like a punch to the gut. Claire was about to speak when he cut her off. "Single? That's what you told him?" He stared at her, his eyes searching hers, but all he saw was the betrayal staring back at him. Claire's face turned pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The truth was too heavy to hide now. Her silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. Mark could feel the eyes of the bar on them now, but he didn't care. The anger that had surged in him was now mingled with a deep, sinking sadness. This was the woman he had loved, the woman he thought he knew, and here she was, lying to his face and making a fool of him in front of strangers. "I thought you were out with your girlfriends," Mark said, his voice quieter now, broken. Claire took a step toward him, but he took a step back. Mark, please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain, Claire. You lied. You're cheating on me, Mark said, each word cutting through the tension like a knife. The man beside Claire shifted awkwardly, clearly wanting to leave but frozen in place. I made a mistake, Claire finally admitted, tears forming in her eyes. I've been feeling lost, confused, but I didn't mean for it to go this far. Mark let out a hollow laugh. So what? This was just some experiment to see if you could throw everything we built away? Before Claire could respond, the man quickly excused himself and bolted for the door, leaving Mark and Claire alone. For a moment, the world seemed to go quiet, the only sounds being the faint clinking of glasses and the murmur of the crowd. Was it worth it? Mark finally asked, his voice hoarse. Was this worth tearing us apart? Claire wiped her eyes, her lip quivering. No. Mark, I'm sorry. I don't know why I did this. I was scared, maybe insecure. Mark cut her off, shaking his head. Number, you don't get to hide behind excuses. You made a choice, and now we're both paying for it. Silence settled between them. It wasn't the confrontation Mark had imagined, nor was it the one Claire had ever prepared for. But in that silence, the reality of what they had lost settled in. There were no easy answers, no simple apologies that could undo what had been done. Without another word, Mark turned and walked out of the bar, leaving Claire behind, the weight of her choices heavy on both of them. That night, Mark didn't go home. He couldn't. Instead, he drove for hours, unsure of where he was going or what the future held. All he knew was that the life he had known was over, shattered in a bar under the dim glow of neon lights. Mark never imagined his world would come crashing down in one night, but a simple message from a friend changes everything. When he discovers his wife Claire with another man at a bar, the betrayal cuts deep. As the confrontation unfolds in front of strangers, Mark is forced to face the harsh truth about his marriage. Caught between anger and heartbreak, he must decide whether to confront the lies or walk away from the life he thought he knew. This is the story of one man's unexpected journey through betrayal, deception, and a confrontation that changes everything.